Welcome to the Underground, my little underground with Peter A.
It's My Little Underground. I'm Peter A. This week on the show we have author, historian, and professor Dr. Austin McCoy. He just put out his latest book, Living in a Daisy Age, The Music, Culture, and World De.A.I.S.Y made. And we got into understanding De.A.I.S.Y's messaging, talking about how inaccessible their work was as music entered into a digital age, where De.A.I.S.Y's influence lives the most in hip-hop today, and so much more with Dr. Austin McCoy on My Little Underground.
My Little Underground.
Austin, I want to thank you so much for coming on My Little Underground to talk about living in a daisy age. I was going through your Instagram and you shared like a throwback picture of you meeting with KRS-One. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, that was early 2000s.
Yeah.
And he, did a show at Pittsburgh and a lecture. So yeah, one of my, good friends, from high school, he worked for the school newspaper. So like we were sort of just out of high school, when this happened. And yeah, like he would use his high school news credentials to like get these interviews, like because he went to other concerts like the Roots and to like other ones, and no, he was successful in like being able to interview like the Roots, Black Star, and then Karis One. So like somehow, yeah, he scored this interview. We went and saw the show. It was amazing, and then yeah, we just met with Karis One in this like classroom at Pitt, and I wish I could remember more of the details of the conversation,
Yeah.
but I do remember just like, wow, we're sitting in this room and there's Karis One, one of my, one of our favorite rappers of all time. And, of course, got a chance to get a CD copy of Criminal Minded signed, so like that's really cool. And yeah, it was one of those situations too where just completely unexpected, and it's just like, yeah, we got that picture.
That's awesome. Like
Yeah.
when you think about like the saying "Don't meet your heroes," right? What
Yeah.
meeting KRS-One, was that kind of contradicted in a way? If you from what you can remember.
Yeah, I mean, like at that time, I know like he is a pretty complicated person, and I think just even with, some of his politics, but I mean, at that time, like I think I was just like starstruck. So like, and also I was like real, like I was younger, less politically mature, right? I mean, like, and I think it was just like, wow, this is Curious One, like in the room, It wasn't a situation where, like I was sort of as aware of the contradictions or, him sort of, not being open to like meeting us or anything. So at that time, that wasn't the case. Thank goodness.
Okay, all right. Um, so let's dive into some De La Soul, and
Yeah.
I want to talk about your experiences with them
Yeah.
just as a fan, right? Now, tell me more about how you saw yourself in De La Soul outside of, Pasta News also wearing glasses like yourself.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I feel like, growing up, and especially once I went through the, gangster rap phase, right? I mean, that I think, me and some of my friends did, but I feel like, a lot of people sort of, you go through your phases in terms of like the style of rap that you like. And I think once I was like a junior, I started like Stakes is High was the first album I bought in real time. So when I first encountered De La Soul, I was like 8 years old, and it was the Me, Myself, and I video. And then, yeah, I went through my gangster rap phase. And then we get to 1996 and I see the video, and it's like I remember watching it for the first time, still, obviously living with my parents. We had a TV, I had a TV in my room, right? This MTV playing music videos. And I saw the video come on and I was just like, oh wow, like I hadn't thought about De La Soul in a couple years. And this, this song sounds amazing, right? And it was, I feel like I hadn't, it'd been a long time since I listened to them, and they sounded like a lot more lyrically sharp, right? I mean, like so, like they sounded the song and the lyrics sound like It could have been like on a Wu-Tang album, which I was really into Wu-Tang at that time too. So like it just instantly appealed to me. But then I think I was also sort of evolving as a fan into like, one of those people who was like, I want to hear something, I want music with more of a message. I'm starting to become a little more disenchanted and alienated with, the bad boy sort of shiny suit stuff that's about to come, like I was not listening. I wasn't listening to gangster rap as much as I had been, right? I mean, so like, to me, I still liked, listening to Tupac a little bit, but it was still just like, oh no, like I could identify with De La Soul because, yeah, it's like Dave rapping in a laundromat, right? I mean, like it's like, like they're doing things on that video, with the exception of Pasta News playing Jerry Stackhouse in one-on-one and dunking on him. Like they were doing things that seemed like what regular people would do. And it was just like, okay, like I don't have to try to emulate, you know, this sort of image that I'm clearly not. Right? I'm clearly not like a hard person, or like, I didn't live in a city or neighborhood that was, particularly rough compared to like growing up in South Central, or, growing up in, tough parts of New York City, or even Philly. Right. I mean, so yeah, like seeing De La Soul in that element and then listening to Stakes is High, like just the boom bap sound appealed to me more. The lyricism appealed to me more. The fact that they were willing to at least call out racism, made me think a little bit more. And then yeah, like they were just, and then yeah, you just get, the title track, the song with Common, right? I mean, so like that album for me became, sort of a, compass for like where my fandom was gonna go, because yeah, like then it was like I'm listening to more Common, at that time, Common Sense, right? I'm beginning to sort of get into more of the like sort of quote underground or backpack rap, and yeah, like even some other favorite artists like Wu-Tang, like they were starting to sort of, go on their decline. So I became a little more alienated with some of the music that was in the mainstream. So yeah, De La Soul Stakes is High sort of points the way, towards, Black Star, Common, The Roots, right? I mean, all these groups, folks who are on Ruckus Records, right? I mean, other folks who are on Ruckus Records, right? It's sort of pointing me in that direction. And yeah, like it just came at the right time. I felt like, I mean, I wasn't entirely mature, but I felt like at least my music taste, like I was sort of ready to move on from some of the, more violent, materialistic rap that had been out there.
Yeah, I kind of have a similar trajectory to
Yeah.
you. I'm a millennial, right? I was born in 93, so I
Okay.
came up, my first entry point into hip hop was Biggie, Big
Yeah.
Pun, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they share some of the similar subject matter because they're from similar neighborhoods, South Bronx, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn during the crack epidemic, right?
Yeah.
So I love that, and then, I came up on the rise of 50 Cent and all that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Jay-Z and everything. But then
Right.
when I got older, I was gravitated towards the KRS Ones.
Yeah.
Return of the Boom Bap is one of my favorite albums
Yeah.
ever, right?
Great.
And I kind of worked backwards, right? So I got into Common, The Roots, Tribe Called Quest, and then I found, I knew about De La Soul, but didn't really dive into their stuff. So, but I found like that wave and the raucous stuff too, Black Star, Mos Def, and all that.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
more me, even though I appreciate the street stuff, and I love Wu Tang to this day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like that being said, right? As far as like the understanding De La Soul and what they're really about, like talk to me about like how you started to really understand their
Mhm.
music, because when you first hear like 3 Feet High and Rising, you're like, oh, this is very jovial and just
Yeah.
uplifting, and then that's it for some people. But like, what is underneath all that,
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, uh, you know, 3 Feet High and Rising, like similar to you, right? I mean, like, encountered them when I was really young, but I didn't listen to that whole album until like 1997, 1998. And same with De La Soul is Dead and Blue Mind State. And, for me, I think it was the late 90s. And as I sort of, just continue to grow as a listener, the more I began to understand what De La Soul were talking about. I mean, so yeah, when I initially, listened to 3 Feet High and Rising in full, like there were just, the songs like Potholes in My Lawn, it's like one of my favorite songs for a long time, by them. Obviously Buddy, right? I mean, so like some of the singles, and then there's, songs like Tread Water, where they're like rapping, but they're talking to animals who are also talking back. And I didn't understand what was going on until like I was in my 20s when I heard songs like that. And I think, once I sort of, began to really focus on their lyricism, and the ways in which that they began to change, like sort of, use different language, right? I mean, they came up with their own sort of sayings. Yeah, it was like early to mid 20s, and I think at least with 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul is Dead when I first listened to that, which was, again around 98, 99. I think I latched onto that pretty quickly because I feel like, uh, you know, much of their storytelling was more straightforward. Obviously, like Millie pulled a pistol on Santa, Biddy's in the BK Lounge, right? I mean, like, even Saturdays, I love these songs. And these stories, right? They weren't telling a fable like they were on, sort of Tread Water, right? I mean, so I latched on to De La Soul is Dead pretty early. And also, De La Soul is Dead sort of, captured this angst, that, I feel like if you were like a nerd, you kind of felt, in the sense of like, like for me, I was sort of in between, sort of nerddom, but then also, like all of us, we like playing sports and we were into that as well. So like it wasn't quite the stereotype in high school, but yeah, like on the one hand, it's like I'm into music very much. On the other hand, I also obviously looked like a nerd at the time and maybe even now. And then it's also like, but you just never know what people want to sort of, test your boundaries, right? I mean, so, like that album appealed to me, right off the bat, in part because they were direct, with their message. And because, yeah, it also captured this, like Oodles of O's, for example, like
Yeah.
just really captured that, that angst, that I was feeling as I was, becoming an adult.
Yeah, isn't De La Soul is Dead? Isn't them trying to like shake off like the hippie aesthetic that
Yeah.
they set in 3 Feet High and Rising? I don't know if you saw this, but I think it was on Mass Appeal's YouTube page. There was like a little
Mhm.
brief De La Soul like documentary thing. It was very
Yeah.
short.
Yeah.
And to hear Maceo say, "Yeah, I was on tour," and then people tried to check me because they think we're just flower power and they don't know that I box. I was like,
Right.
"Whoa,
Right.
fantastic."
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, one of the stories I've enjoyed telling people was, yeah, like when they, put out, 3 Feet High and Rising, of course, like, they adapted some of that, imagery, the day glow colors, and obviously, again, sort of, you know, uh, creating their own language, sort of being, countercultural. But yeah, you also sort of detect hints of their rebellion against themselves on Me, Myself, and I. And no, I tell people about how, yeah, like when they were on tour with like LL Cool J, NWA, right? I mean, like all these folks who are like hard, right? I mean, like
Right.
who like sort of present themselves as hard. And yeah, they're the ones who get kicked off the tour for fighting. Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, so yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, their second album, it is them rebelling against themselves. And I think in a way, that appealed to that aspect appealed to me because yeah, it's like you sort of you see the album, you see the title De La Soul is Dead, you see the cover, the flower pot knocked over, and you're like, wow, like so they're really like just they're really just brushing off the first album, right? I mean, and it's like, and it's not something that you could really imagine rap artists, especially in the 80s and 90s, really doing. It's all, because it's about sort of continue, like you find a formula that keeps you going and you continue it. Whereas they're just like, no, we're just doing a 180 here.
because when you look into the history of 3 Feet High and Rising and everything that
Yeah.
came after that, it makes sense for them to want to change up everything because of all the sampling things they went through.
Yeah, that too.
Literally every sampling documentary has like Pasanos in it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's
yeah,
just it's insane. Or
yeah,
either it's Pasanos or it's Bismarcky. You know,
yeah,
name a
yeah.
Long Island rapper, but those two
Right,
specifically, it's like a lot of the sampling on there is just unheard of at the time. It's
right.
ridiculous
Yeah,
in a good
definitely.
way. In a good way.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
So talk to me about some of your main inspirations for writing living in a daisy age.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously De La Soul being number one, right? I mean,
Hmm.
since the book is about them and thinking about, yeah, just, how does this group, that, I fell in love with, whether it was, again, watching the video, Me, Myself, and I for the first time, or, picking up Stakes is High and going back through their catalog and then growing up with their music. I mean, so yeah, like their albums, their catalog is one of the few catalogs where it's like I'm consistently going back to, so yeah, just thinking about, them, and of course, like they're sort of the number one inspiration, in that regard. I think the second inspiration and probably should be like 1A, 1B is my parents. Like, I mean, they were the ones who first sort of gave me any sort of music education. Like my parents, like I think, yeah, just growing up, it was like, obviously like for a lot of black folks, like it's the Jacksons, Michael Jackson,
Yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire, James Brown, Funkadelic, right? I mean, like Brothers Johnson, Quincy Jones, or like my parents just sort of, I absorbed so much from, just listening to the music that they listened to. So then, yeah, like I hear Say No Go, and I'm like, oh, I remember my parents listening, to this song, right, to the original song. I mean, so like that, them and the music education, obviously even the political education or sort of the social education that my parents gave me, and that's another reason why they pop up in the book quite a bit. But then yeah, I think number three, friends who I grew up in high school with. I mean, like those were so if my parents gave me the foundation, like the sort of music education foundation, it was my friends who sort of all of our debates around, who was better, Biggie or Tupac, or sort of all of us falling in love with the native tongues and listening to De La Soul. And, I had friends who worked at a local record store. And, they were ordering albums, that we were all listening to. We were sort of reading the Source magazine and having and debating, what should be five mics, what shouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. So like they were the ones who sort of helped me and we helped each other sort of think about the history of rap music, the history of hip hop culture. And no, like, at that time, which is, probably one of the reasons why a lot of folks go back to the music that they listened to in high school, middle school, high school, colleges. It's a lot more collective at that time. So you're listening together. Not everyone could afford every single album. So we had, so we were sort of pulling our resources together to listen. So, I would say, yeah, obviously De La Soul, my parents, my friends.
When it comes to De La Soul, right? And me being a millennial, when I was getting into loving music, De La Soul's music was not really accessible anywhere, especially growing up in the digital revolution and everything.
Right.
I remember like, going on iTunes and looking up De La Soul and all the classic albums that everyone was talking about, nowhere to be found.
Right.
When you think of like, how you talk about De La Soul to younger people, or even listening to their music in the digital age, how do you even have those conversations? Like, because you have no frame of, some people don't have any sense of like history. Because the first time I heard 3 Feet High and Rising, I found the CD copy at a flea market
Mm,
like a decade ago. That was the
yeah.
first time I heard the album in full because I wasn't able to get it anywhere else unless I wanted to pirate it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I start my book by talking about the story of, teaching my hip hop history class at Auburn University and showing a clip of Hip Hop Evolution, like the Netflix documentary series.
Yep.
And yeah, like De La Soul, they sort of, the video, me, myself, and I sort of pops up on the screen, and my students' eyes are just bugging out because they're just like, who are these guys? Who are these guys? They look so cool, the music sounds so cool. And then, yeah, I'm telling them, guess what? You can't find their music on streaming. Like, you might be able to sort of download it, pirate it, but like, you're not going to be able to find their music on streaming. And they were just like, what? And just because they just could not conceive of the idea of, their sort of streaming services, whether they were using Spotify, Apple Music, or anything else, that just they thought they had everything. Thought they had all music, and it was just like, no, like they do not, right? I mean, so I feel like, before their music came back, a lot of it was, either you sort of, I'm talking to students and I'm showing them documentary clips. There might have been a few music videos that were still sort of on YouTube that you could show. But then, yeah, it's like, how do you talk about this group that made such a huge impact, influenced so many artists who came after them, and you cannot listen to their whole catalog? And yeah, for me, growing up in the 90s, I was able to buy all their CDs and I just kept them. Right? Like, I kept them and I was like, thank goodness I kept these CDs. And, they had their giveaway on Valentine's Day in 2014, I believe. And yeah, if you missed that, where they just gave away their whole Tommy Boy catalog, on MP3, then it's like, yeah, where else are you going to find their music? And yeah, I think, yeah, trying to sort of get people to understand their impact without being able to sort of go and say, well, listen to De La Soul is Dead or listen to 3 Feet High and Rising. It definitely was a challenge.
Right, right. So in your research for Daisy Age, what have you discovered about them that you didn't know before? And number two, was there anything that you discovered about them that changed your perspective on them, good, bad, and different?
Hmm. So no, this is a great question. Like, so there's a couple things, in terms of, what I didn't really, understand before. Like, so I think learning about the story behind Millie pulled a pistol on Santa and
Mm,
Pasta News saying that, I mean, because yeah, the song appearing on De La Soul is Dead, one of the best, rap storytelling songs that you'll find. And he was just like, he said that he was thinking about a situation that he knew someone was in terms of sort of being vulnerable, but then also I can't remember if he said he was like riding in the bus or riding the train, probably riding the train, and he saw someone wearing a Santa suit. And sort of, and like these two things came together into this story. And I was just like, yeah, that's amazing. Totally random. And also it just, illustrates, right, like how, Pasta News, Trugoy and Maceo sort of thought artistically, right? I mean, and it's like, they're if we think about their sampling techniques, it is like pulling from all sorts of sources that you wouldn't even expect. And that story is sort of an embodied reflection of that, where it's just like you're thinking of someone that and you're inspired by their terrible situation, and then yeah, you just see someone randomly wearing a Santa suit, and you're just like, oh, and then the other thing was basically the separation between them and Prince Paul. So,
yep.
I think when I listened to Stakes is High, the first time, I obviously didn't really notice, even though I kind of like was vaguely like I knew who Prince Paul was, but I was vaguely aware that of the fact that they were sort of, together because I hadn't gone through their discography deeply as I would in the next year. So, like I think, they talk about this, on that documentary, that Mass Appeal documentary you mentioned, where, yeah, like Pasta News and the members of the group, they're sort of approaching this album and they're like, wow, we want to get serious here. And Prince Paul's sort of, comedic, style just does not fit. it's not going to fit with what we're trying to do with this album, because they're back, their sort of backs are against the wall because Tommy Boy's starting to question their viability. And then of course we, see the sort of, the emergence of these sort of rap wars, whether it is like Bad Boy versus Death Row, but you had like Nas going at Biggie, right? Like you had all these sort of, disses that were happening, and De La Soul wanted to comment on this, and they were just like, okay, Prince Paul, like, like we don't think you're gonna fit. And Prince Paul, it was amicable because he even talks about in that documentary where he's just like, yeah, like, we just sort of came to an agreement that this wasn't gonna work. But you still sort of hear remnants of Prince Paul on Dog Eat Dog, like he's the one who samples the dog barking. You know, what I mean? So it's just like not something that I was like totally aware of, really, at least in terms of the specifics of the story until I did the research.
Jay Dilla did most of that album, if not all.
He did Stakes is High, I
Okay.
believe. Like I would have to double check on some of like on the credits. But yeah, I know he did Stakes is High. Prince Paul contributed to Dog Eat Dog. But the other underrated piece of this is that like, Maceo, Posthumous, and Dave, like they were good producers, right? I mean, so but I would have to double check because I feel like there might have been more than just, them three.
Okay. All right. It was more of like United Front.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
So tell me more about your hip hop history course or any hip
yeah.
hop history course that you've taught over the years.
Yeah. So, yeah, like it's funny because, no, it's a course that, one, I didn't think I was going to be able to teach. And then when I got hired at Auburn and they were like, what kind of class would you like to teach? I was like, well, actually, it'd be cool to teach a hip hop history class because, the classes I taught before that as a graduate student, I would like have like one hip hop related lecture because I was just like, well, this is just going to be for me, and when I would talk about like, the intersection between, for instance, rap and the war on drugs and, students would like get really into it. And I was just like, oh, like, well, if we, could I imagine just sort of like, what would I do, sort of in terms of like doing a bigger class around this topic. So yeah, like what we try to do is, like we start with some of the prehistory of rap, right? I mean, so whether it is, thinking about DJ culture, sort of radio DJs who are rhyming, thinking about some of the sort of really old gospel, sort of lyricists who were, kind of singing and rhyming at the same time. You got, like sort of, obviously Gil Scott Heron, the Last Poets, the Watts, the Watts Prophets, right? I mean, like you have all these like sort of other artists that are coming up in the 1960s and early 70s as well. And then I try to ground the students, in the origins and talking about the relationship between, the immigration from, from the Caribbean and sort of how Jamaican folks were sort of bringing over, some of the building blocks of rap culture as well. And then, yeah, like from there, it's just like, yeah, thinking about like I try to get students to think about how, hip hop wasn't even called hip hop. It was just like this thing that people did, right? Until the 1980s. And they're just because again, I think part of it was like, well, we take this culture and genre for granted. And no, like there was a long time before people even, coined the term hip hop. So, going from there and then it's like and then yeah, once we get into the 80s and the 90s and I'm like basically in the place where I'm the most comfortable because I'm like, well, this is when I grew up. We're gonna, and then the question becomes like, what am I gonna choose? I think what's been different about, the last couple times I've taught it is that I've, moved away from relying on playlists, because I would just sort of create these playlists that are centered around themes or the lectures and might do a little bit of that, but now I'm trying to get students to listen to full albums.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah,
tough.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's like, I mean, because no, I'm always asking them, like, how do you listen to music? And a lot of times, yeah, it's, playlists, obviously streaming. And I'm just like, okay, we got to listen to full albums. So, the first time I did that, I signed, Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City. De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. I was like, oh, this is available. We're jumping right in.
Yeah.
Right? We're jumping right in, Missy Elliott's first album, and then this past time, yeah, like we listened to the Outcast of Gemini, and no, like we had this conversation and I asked them, so how many of you had seen Outcast's B.O.B. video? And no one raised their hand. And I was just like, okay, how many of you have listened to a full Outkast album before today? And like one person raised their hand, and I was like, okay, your assignment, like after I played them like the first 2 minutes of Bombs Over Baghdad, because I was like, you've never seen this before? Like, I gotta play you a clip of it just for a moment. Like, we're running out of time, but I have to do this because you have to see this. And then I was like, you need to go listen to their albums. Like, you will, it's not gonna be a waste of your time. You will thank me later and you will appreciate it because they're like because you might like songs like Hey Ya, but their albums are phenomenal, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like, having that sort of intergenerational conversation about how we listen to music. And yeah, I can appreciate the playlists and I can obviously appreciate being able to have, all the music, or most recorded music at your fingertips. But there's also just something about listening to whole works of art, which is, again, even to bring it back to De La Soul, what they, their albums were full works of art, from the songs to the skits
Yep.
to the album, to the covers to the liner notes. So yeah, that's been like the crusade I've been on. Like listen to full albums, and if you can, buy some physical media because that helps too.
Have any of your students showed you artists that you didn't know about?
Definitely. Because yeah, it's just like I'm sort of like I'm trying to remember names. Like no, there's one student who this past, semester was just like, yeah, like, I really like the Suicide Boys. And I'm like, I've seen album covers, but I was just like, yeah, haven't heard them, haven't listened to them. And then I like that's the only name that comes to mind right now.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's more because I always ask them like what are they listening to, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not sure if I've heard of them.
Okay. Okay, cool. Where in hip hop today, or at least the last like 10, 15 years, do you see De La Soul's influence the most?
Yeah, so I think like Odd Future comes to mind,
Hmm.
sort of, and obviously with Tyler the Creator and Earl Sweatshirt. I mean, like Earl Sweatshirt, I think on his latest album has a song that's dedicated to Trugoy, and it's really good. And yeah, I think like they're sort of at top of my mind because obviously Odd Future, like when they first came out, I can't say that I was, sort of into them as much. Like I think they were appealing to folks who are a little younger than me, even though I was like probably like in my early 30s. But I was like, but I heard of Tyler and I heard a couple songs and I was like, wow, this guy could really rap. But his lyrics to me were also just like shock lyrics, and I was just like, I don't think that's for me. He could really rap, but it's not really for me.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know but then it's like but he also does this evolution that is sort of similar to De La Soul in terms of like his like most of like his solo albums, like you really can't find one that's the same. I think De La Soul sort of is one of the first groups that really is like, yeah, we're going to put out an album and we're just going to either rebel against our past or we're going to do something totally different. And Tyler the Creator's discography, I feel like is very sonically and lyrically diverse. Then of course, right? I mean, you think about a group like Odd Future and the folks who were in it. I mean, yeah, they were coming in from the outside. They were like you could tell that they were sort of, these, young alienated, folks, right? I mean, and I feel like De La Soul, they also sort of were coming in to rap from the outside as well. So yeah, I always go to like Odd Future, Tyler the Creator, Earl Sweatshirt, Frank Ocean, like that whole group. But then, yeah, like you have other rappers like Sky Zoo who, leans a lot into jazz and sort of jazz inflected, production, right? I mean, and that just takes me back to Balloon Mind State, with De La Soul sort of leaning into jazz as well. Folks like Rhapsody in terms of, just the lyricism. And then, yeah, you think, I mean, even, like Griselda, Rock Marciano, right? And sort of the dense, the dense beats that they rap over, but then also they've created their own world, and each album is sort of its own world as well, right? I mean, so those are some of the artists that come like that instantly come to mind. Like Doechii, I think her first album, Alligator Bites Never Heal, also reminded me of like 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul is Dead, in that it's a concept album telling stories, and also just she's being very vulnerable on the album, which again I think De La Soul is also some of the pioneers of being vulnerable on a record.
Yeah, when you look at skits and
Yeah,
everything,
yeah,
Ready to Die, tons of skits, Wu-Tang, tons of skits.
yeah,
Very
yeah,
the theater aspect
yeah,
of making an album. That's all De La Soul. But
yeah, yeah,
have you ever heard of Jean Grey and Quelly Chris's album, Everything's Fine?
yeah, yeah.
Isn't that like very 3 Feet High and Rising? You know?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
It like the whole game show aspect of
I
it, like the world's collapsing. It's yeah, it's on par with what De La was
Yeah,
bringing.
no, you're absolutely right. No, that's a
Yeah.
good one.
So Austin, I want to thank you so much for coming on My
Yeah.
Little Underground. Please tell everyone the best way to get living in a Daisy Age, and I'll whatever link is appropriate for you, I can link it in the description. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean, you should be able to find it at a local bookstore. If your local bookstore doesn't have it, go there and ask them to order it. But in terms of ordering it direct, you can order it, at the Simon and Schuster webpage. If you prefer bookshop, which you can sort of, attach your, order to sort of supporting an independent bookstore, you can go to bookshop as well.
Okay. All right, Austin, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. This was great.
All right.
My Little Underground.